on to round 4 of nationals, as I'm all sure by now you've heard this a bunch of times, so I'll make it nice and quick. Speeches are 8 minutes. I will give you a clap at 1 minute and a clap at 7 minutes to open and close POIs, 2 claps at 8 minutes. I'll give you 3 claps at 8:15. If you get to that point and you're still talking, please wrap up your speech. We'd love the tournament to run to time as it has done so far. Leaders' replies, we'll cut that speaker time in half. There'll be no POIs. They'll be 4 minutes long. I'll give you a clap at 3 minutes, 2 claps at 4 minutes. The motion for this round is this House supports the widespread adoption of death of the author theory of literature analysis. Both of you guys have got the info slide and what that means. We've got Central North Island on the AF, and we've got Bay of Plenty on the negating. Are there any questions before we start the debate? Otherwise, we can kick it off. Perfect. Without further ado, I will invite the first affirmative speaker to come up and open today's debate.
Guys, it's okay. One high drop in my CS6. The problem in this debate is when we're unable to transcend ideas past the foundation in which they were formed, the context in which it was perceived, you end up with a lack of nuance and understanding of that knowledge. This looks like taking ideas from Sophocles' Oedipus Rex and using it in everyday life. 4 things in this debate. 1, some setup. 2, why knowledge transcends time. 3, why we get more cultural nuance. And 4, Nathan has a split on better reader enjoyment. Okay, first off, what does this narrative actually look like? It looks like someone reading a book and internalizing it into their own worlds, views, and experiences, and taking into a personal idea. We think that this narrative is quite simply as old as time. It's carried by people who either read to gain a better understanding and more knowledge, and it's also carried by children and kids, in which literature is such a core part of today's education system. How do we internalize it? We internalize it by taking our own interpretation, and we take that, and we can also take into consideration the author's interpretation. What do we get here? We look at a world with new knowledge and holistic views, and it lets you connect with the world from ancient times to the Gothic era to now. You can take parts from every single time period. It also feeds into the narrative that literature is made to critique society and simply can be learned from. We win this debate by proving that death of the author leads to better knowledge and more cultural understanding. Point 1. Why knowledge transcends time. When we look at texts, in the time they were said, they had different ideas that vastly contrast with what's happening today. We think that core themes and motifs that run through and transcend time can be picked out and can still be debated and talked about today. This looks like when Shakespeare was written so long ago, but we still talk and debate about the ideas of his text, and we still have competitions in Wellington to talk about the theatric and interpret it in certain ways. 3 mechanisms for you to hear today. 1. Ideas and things are not simply restricted to a time period. We see this in Sophocles and Oedipus Rex, in which there's a core theme of hubris, and this was written in 78 AD, so quite a long time ago. This idea of hubris can then transcend time and be applied to your everyday life. What does this mean? It means that all of the ideas, their motifs, and the underlying principles are still applicable. You can find connections between A, what the author was saying, B, your own perceptives, and C, the current relevant issues today, and you can link them all together neatly and get a nuanced understanding. This leads to being able to see texts and societies as you can see these ideas and motifs develop, and you can see them happening in your life, and when you link them back together, we think this is really, really important. This looks like in the book, The Lord of the Flies, when the theme is of these teenage boys simply going crazy on an island. However, when you take certain splices, like the idea of when the boys simply stand around a dead pig, what does this allude to? This alludes to this idea of sexual assault and rape, and then present them rather than just some boys who went crazy and killed a pig. It's a vessel for better understanding in today's society. What do we get here? We get students and people taking important ideas from different time periods, reinterpreting them to affect their lives, which is the most important thing, and creating a nuanced understanding. Why is this? Take Oedipus Rex. A guy kills his father and marries his mother because he wanted to defy some god. This was probably relevant back then, and this idea of hubris, but if you simply look at it that way and link it to life now, it's simply not applicable. But if you take the idea of not being too arrogant and that you should stay humble, you can put that and work that into your everyday life. A wealth of knowledge can be tapped into if we simply look past the borders in which it was built. I'll take a POI now.
Would you not agree that that baseline view is the author's intention?
Just because it's the author's intention doesn't mean we can't interpret it this way. We think that in some other examples you also get different interpretations, but the key principle is you take the underlying motif that exists, whether the author was to write it or not, and we don't know because he was like 2,000 years old by now or something, and you take that and you apply that into your own life. 2. Why we get more cultural nuance. We think that by reading text from a different culture, we can see a lot of different ideas that come out. Take an African book applying the ideas of Ubuntu, a concept about teamwork, about how everyone needs to work together and how that the team needs to thrive as a team. You simply cannot be selfish. This idea is set in an African village and a tribe in which there are young children, playing soccer together, right? What can this transcend to? This transcends into great other settings, like corporate settings or a swimming team and things like that. And it's really hard to transcend the idea if I look at it and only look at it as in the idea of a small African tribe of people playing football. You miss out on this nuanced understanding. Different cultures create different ways of doing things that can be applied in different cultures and lives, and this leads to many, many benefits. 3 mechanisms for you here today. 1. Converting ideas. We can simply convert ideas across cultures, across the borders that they were built, and that may be difficult to implement when we only look at them in one way. Take the example of Sun Tzu's Art of War. Looking at it in strictly the way it was written, it was a Chinese militaristic guide on how to literally win war. Now, what happens when we take these underlying motifs, when we take these ideas, we strip out the war part and we start to talk about them? You get applicable things about know the enemy, know yourself becomes be prepared in what you do and try and get as much preparation as you can. And we think that's more applicable than literally find your enemy and, find yourself, right? We think that's more applicable. 2. Diversifying views. This converting ideas leads to diversifying views in which we're able to foster and look in different views. For example, certain cultures rise, and each with their own merits and demerits on views. Take the Japanese idea of Kaizen, in which small circle improvements lead to big overall change. If we simply were unable to look at this in a Western view, we would not have gained this. You take bits and ideas and you convert them into your own style. 3, it doesn't alienate people. When you look at a book and sometimes you can't relate because you're trying to take it from the author's perspective. When you're reading a book like In the Sea There Are Crocodiles about a poor Pakistani refugee trying to flee his country, I simply cannot relate to that no matter how much I want to or how much I try. You alienate it, you don't want to read it, and you simply can't take these experiences, implement your own links. But when you actually look at it from a broader view, you get better understanding and you're able to read it rather than just bumbling around and just seeing words. What do we get here? We get more cultural understanding from different cultures. You get people who want to and are able to read more books if they want to. You get ideas that are diversified from other regions coming and helping everyone by sharing ideas and benefits. Why is this so important? Because we think broader views and cultural understandings which benefit everyone is so good and so important for a cohesive society. What have I proved in my speech today? I've proved we get knowledge that simply transcends time, and we can't do this if we look at it in the period it was written. I've told you that we get cultural nuances and we apply them, making life better for everyone. And I've shown you that simply the death of the author is the only thing to go for. Thank you.
I think Speaker 4 was a fine speech. I now invite the first speaker of the negation debate to come up and open Neptune's case.
I'll engage with a couple of their examples with regards to Shakespeare and obviously the dead pig narrative that they talked about with regards to Lord of the Flies. With regards to Shakespeare, Shakespeare was quite progressive for his time. He invented the first black main character in a play. He actually didn't marginalize women and made them strong characters. These were kind of like outlandish things with regards to that time period. It was so outlandish. Do you not really think that his main intention then was to start meaning and start conversations and dialogues about this thing? Therefore, the actual meaning behind these things is to actually start meaning. And with regards to the dead pig narrative, with regards to authors, it's the author's intent to actually relate this to sexual assault. They establish this as somehow reader interpretation. However, with the use of a metaphor is quite literally the author's intention. They want to show how this dead pig is actually symbolic of something else. So they're just marginalizing this author into explicitly saying that they are doing something instead of using artistic tools such as metaphors, such as similes, which is actually what the entire purpose of literature is about. So we don't really get any of their mechanization on that. Firstly, with regards to a bit of setup, so how do we get more buy-in to the meanings of text, and secondly, how we get a higher quality analysis on our side. So in both worlds, they read the same text. The nuance is they interpret the meaning differently. So on our side, the reader is analyzing the author's experiences or perspectives. B, they deduce the intended meaning, or at least try and find it. And C, they apply this meaning to however they choose to. So they use the author's lens to reflect on their own life in this sense. So this looks like using an African-American lens of which this person experienced racism in the day-to-day life. However, as a white reader, they could just interpret this as racism is bad. So in this case, we actually deduct a holistic understanding because we are experiencing it through the author's intended lens instead of just interpreting it as a white person going, oh yeah, this is inherently bad. However, we feel like putting somebody into their shoes is actually more effective because you're actually deducting that holistic view. On their side, the author analyzes the same experiences and perspectives, but however, they choose how they interpret this. So this looks like the story of love. So let's say a serial killer and a normal person were to have a loving relationship. Instead of understanding the nuances the author intends to display, you take away that meaning that some people are just twisted and insane for loving this serial killer. Like, how can I relate to this person? So we win this debate today if we prove 1, the reader is more likely to take away meaning, or 2, they're likely to understand meaning better. So, and this is ultimately the objective of a book and is what impacts people's lives the most, so should be weighed highest. So 1, with regards to buy-in. So what do readers look for in a book? 1, to escape their lives. So some people, to live your life in somebody else's shoes. 2, to experience, understanding a different perspective to an issue. Or 3, to evolve. Like books such as The Alchemist, where you inherit a different way to look at the world. You think about all these new nuanced perspectives. You actually inherit the knowledge that you've taken from a book and apply it to your own life. How are you expected to have an interpretation if you can't even see that interpretation to begin with? You have to actually divulge an author's purpose to get that interpretation to actually bring it back into your own life. So why is an author's intention more engaging? 1, you experience somebody else's life. You are yourself every single day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You are gray, 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 gray. However, if the author, let's say, gives you the lens of pink, you are going to want to go back to that pink because it's something different. It's something you're not experiencing every single day. You're experiencing something that's new and different that is inherently drawing you back to that. So you feel connected and feel immersed into that world. You feel sympathetic to their perspective. Secondly, you experience something new. Note that on their side, the main thing the reading is taking away is restricted by their scope of experiences. So it is inherently less interesting. So on our side, people are actually open to experiencing new meanings and to take away new worldviews, and so can learn from each new book that they actually read. 3 is more informative. Not every experience that you read you can relate to. Not everybody can relate to the Holocaust. However, by actually experiencing the interpretation of the reader, you can actually put yourself into that scenario and think, oh my God, wow, how did this happen? You can't actually relate to that because you didn't experience the Holocaust. We need to have these different experiences that the reader deducts for us to actually have that nuanced understanding. So why is this important? 1, the reader is more engaged. They actually buy into ideas. That is both the reader's and the author's purpose, as we deducted before. before, and they engage with more experiences, more diverse meanings, and they can actually apply this to their life, which is also important. Secondly, we promote artistic freedom. So what is the point in communicating subtle nuances of the relationship between two characters if all the reader is going to deduct is whether one of the characters is right to love the other in their subjective perspective? The author gets inherent validation of seeing others seeing what they're seeing. They're more likely to continue writing in this sense and create more engaging literature, which can actually spread and actually create and fulfill our burdens, which empowers the reader to actually create these new perspectives of which to give other people new nuanced lenses into the world. So what is why meanings are shared? What meanings are shared? Sorry, one, personal. So this looks like culture and the experience of struggles. Secondly, it looks like they're designed for a purpose. This looks like a commentary on colonial wrongs and the calls for reparation. Or, with regards to the book of the ones who walk away from Omelas, the literal purpose is for you to question. We claim all of their benefits in this case. The author's intention is to get the reader to draw their own interpretations. That can be a literal strain of novels. So we claim all of their benefits on all of the interpretive side of their debate. So why do the readers get a deeper understanding of meanings? One, on Aft, the meanings that the reader takes away is vulnerable to bias. This looks like a personal bias. In regards to a colonial text, if a white reader was to read it, they would be biased to find justification in their actions so that they don't have to feel the guilt. However, the real meaning of that text is to evoke these strong emotions of guilt. However, guilt is such a strong emotion, you want to shy away from it. However, by confronting a reader in this sense, you are actually fulfilling the author's purpose instead of what they're saying, which is with regards to their own interpretation, which is, oh yes, I already know that the colonialism was bad. However, to actually feel that, you need to feel that experience of guilt, which is what seeing it through the author's eyes does. So one, they do, B, I'll accept this POI this time.
Yeah, cocaine puts great people in a new color. Under your logic, why are readers and drug addicts the same?
So, by having somebody that has actually experienced cocaine and telling you what that experience feels like, you are less likely to try that out for yourself. Although I don't fully understand what that POI with regards to cocaine and reading. Reading is something explorative. Cocaine is obviously like a coping mechanism, so we don't see how that comparative works out. Secondly, but they also, they don't self-reflect. This is also the fundamental bias of symbols. This looks like somebody thinking that fire means destruction and bad and death. However, an author can interpret fire as something that is life and love and renewal. If you're constantly compacted into your own self-viewing of fire as this one thing, you'll see the symbol of fire in every single text as death and destruction. What happens if the author wants to use you to see fire as love and renewal? Then you're not going to fully understand the full meaning of the text and lose out on the ability of reading the texts and reading the full understanding of their text. So on our side, when you engage with the author's purpose, you're more sympathetic to their struggles, their lives, and other representations that they are trying to inherently show you in the reading of a book. They lose out on all of these positive benefits of reading a book. So why is this important? We get higher quality of derivation, truly more understanding, more sympathetic to struggles, and when you apply this to your life, it's way better. It's easier to apply. This looks like a man that is, this is like a man reading the Femme Mystique, but tries to interpret the meaning, but ends up mansplaining because he doesn't fully understand what the Femme Mystique means. We think a full holistic understanding comes about when you actually engage with the author's purpose and less of your own compact life views. Thank you very much.
I think the speaker thought was a fine speech. I now invite the second speaker from the affirmative bench to come up and continue their case today.
A few things to go over in this speech. Firstly, why do authors actually write books in the first place? Secondly, on interpreting meaning and why it's exclusive to our side that we get better interpretation and application in the real world. And then lastly, I'm going to give you my split on better reader enjoyment and engagement, not that that responds to a lot of their material about buying. Okay, so firstly then, why do authors actually write these books in the first place? A lot of the reasons sometimes authors write is to critique society, right? You see that with like Suzanne Collins when she wrote The Hunger Games. She was doing that because she was like literally flicking through TV and seeing how horrible the world was going. She then was so inspired by that, she wanted to write a book about that. Authors write books often to critique society. That's extremely important in that their messagings are often grounded in the context for which they want to critique. Take The Crucible, for example. Miller wrote that not because he thought like theology was bad. He wrote that because of McCarthyism and the Red Scare. If you ground that in that context, that probably means that people who only interpret that context, they cannot apply it to other places in their life. I'll explain that later. But also, I think that that is extremely important to clear up at the beginning of this, because that is why authors write. So then, let's talk about interpreting meaning. What did they tell us here? They told us that you have to understand the author's intention. You have to use the author's lens in order to interpret and understand a text to get its full potential. Few responses here. I firstly think that like that's just unfair of their characterization of people, right? Like people aren't dumb. They can read and they can make their own understanding and judgments themselves. They probably don't need like an author holding their hand and saying, this is why I wrote this, you need to read that. But also, secondly, we think that it could be really difficult for readers who have different understandings to the authors or different opinions to pick out the exact messages they want. We would rather have like people reading a book and taking what they want out of it rather than being told like this is what the author wanted you to understand. You have to take that out of the novel. Secondly, they talked about like the terms of like understanding, for example, like in culture and stuff. I think we can claim all of that, right? And like under Oliver's material, right? Why is this? Firstly, Oliver told you like cross-cultural understanding between texts that aren't necessarily written in the same language. Take the novel like Butter, for example, that was written by a Japanese author, that has been translated into English, and also you get like the themes such as like feminism and empowerment from that novel. But what do you get from that? You get like a uniquely different lens in that you don't have like the Western lens, but rather you've got the Japanese lens. But why is that exclusive to our side and that people actually take the readings and from that? Firstly, it's because you don't have to be grounded in the author. I think majority of people probably when they see their like author's name or something, a lot of people inherently might not want to pick that book because they see like a foreign name written on the book, right? Once like maybe they could pick that out because they don't have to follow exactly what the author wants to think because they might not think the same. We think they can still pull out all of their great messaging from these novels, which is extremely important. Okay. What else did they want to talk about? They talked about like you can't experience like you can't understand it because it's from like a different person's life like experience or something. I think that's like uniquely the same on either side, right? But authors like often aren't writing something through their own lens, right? Like take fiction authors like Jan Martel who wrote Life of Pi. I don't really think he was stuck on a boat with a tiger. He was writing that from like a point of fiction. Therefore, I don't think his lens is inherently the right lens to interpret. That means that like I think people can pick out what they want, and we think that's extremely beneficial. But why is it beneficial that people can pick out their interpretations on their own rather than being told what that interpretation is? Firstly, it's that they can actually make the real life connections themselves. That is to say, like after reading The Crucible and talking about like hysteria and stuff, I instantly made the link like maybe to like the hysteria of like the AIDS epidemic, right? Like Miller was definitely not writing about that, but I saw that connection and made that connection. That's extremely important, and that it helps people's understanding of society throughout history, but also in modern context, like how America is slowly turning into the Hunger Games with the Met Gala and all of that kind of bad stuff. You know, that's probably very helpful to readers, but also who is actually benefiting from this? We think that a unique group who benefits from this are probably like school kids who are being taught this, like, and we think that's really important because they can pick out all of these messagings in their life. I think that's really important. Before I move on, I'll take a few on.
So you said at the start of your speech that we think readers should only be taking out what they want, and gave the example of the Hunger Games. However, social commentary, as we proved before, is a hard pill to swallow. What makes you think that people will actually like try and divulge that meaning instead of just going, oh yeah, cool girl, Archer?
Okay, if it's a hard pill to swallow, then they probably might not just take it at all. At least when they have their own interpretations, they take some messaging out themselves. We think that's important, that they take rather some messaging rather than no messaging, just because they think like, I don't agree with the author and where they stand here. We think that is uniquely very, very important and exclusive to our side, because under their side, they're literally telling you you have to do what the author like wants you to do. Okay. Let's move let me tell you my split material on why we get better reader engagement then, right? What is important to note at the beginning of this point, it's like often people read, like they told you, for enjoyment, right? Here's why reading like and having to understand your text through the author's lens is just not enjoyable. Firstly, readers just don't feel like they have to research into what the author wants to do, right? Like when I'm sitting in English class and my teacher is making me research the author, when he lived, what he did, that's really boring, right? I don't really want to do any of that. Maybe I probably don't even want to read the novel. Secondly, this means readers feel like they have to constantly check in if they can actually understand what the author is saying, right? That means they have to keep being like, am I actually getting that from the novel? Why am I not getting that from the novel? And they also like question themselves and being like, am I dumb? Why can't I just like see the messaging in this novel? Thirdly, we think that this leads to people when they come up with their like own interpretation of a novel, they don't feel like their opinion is valid or that the lesson they take is a good thing. But why is that really harmful? That's really bad because like we think you taking a message from a novel is extremely important, but at the point at which you're being told that that's not the right opinion, you probably don't take that message with you into the rest of your life or apply it to like wider society. But also, what are the outcomes at this point, right? At the end of this point, I think we prove that firstly, it's just way more enjoyable to read a novel when you're not constantly searching up and reading upon like what the author's intention was, right? Secondly, readers just feel less satisfied when they don't have the same interpretation or understanding as the reader wanted them to have. That just leaves them feeling kind of like less happy with what they've read and less content with like the book they've read, and they're probably unlikely to, suggest for other people to read it. Okay, but why is this so important? Firstly, I think that like having readers feel happy when they read is just really important, right? And that like, you have to have readers to have books keep going. If people are constantly finding that their book that they're reading is just not that, like, they can't find the interpretation and they can't find the meanings, I think that that's really harmful, and that they probably either A, stop taking the messages from the book, but also they just stop like reading, which is probably pretty bad and like a unique thing. I think ultimately at the end of this debate, what's extremely crucial is that like both sides try to argue that you get interpretations, but I think what's really important to highlight is when you are actually able to pick out your own interpretations, that means you can actually take interpretations as a whole. Because like you're limited to what the author wants, for people who don't agree with the author at all, you don't take their messages in society, you don't take them and apply them to your daily lives. Under our side, we would rather have people taking some messaging rather than no messaging.
The speaker for what was a fine speech. I would now invite the second speaker from the negating bench to come up and continue their team's case.
When you present a classroom of small children with Mein Kampf and tell them to like reflect on issues in society and how that applies to their own life, they're probably not going to understand. We think it's far more beneficial for them to understand that the author's purpose was like really bad and that you shouldn't support that. That's the message that we want to send. We want to like make this material more easy to consume, get more buy-in, and get a more in-depth meaning. So firstly, just a quick point of rebuttal, and then why the quality of interpretation is lower on their side, and then why it's greater on our side. So firstly, just one quick point of rebuttal on like how themes transcend time. We got like a lot of examples of like Shakespeare and like how it was applicable to modern issues. Look, I think basically here, this is just not mutually exclusive. We tell you that on our side in setup, like we inherit this lens and apply it to issues in day-to-day life. It's unlikely that people just like see Iago killing Othello, or see like Othello kill Desdemona, and they're like suddenly, oh, I'm gonna go like get this new like fiance and then just like kill her in bed and like smother her. It's more likely they reflect on like the author's purpose to reflect jealousy and choose not to apply that to their life. So then, on why they can't get a higher quality of interpretation on their side of the house. We basically hear a push here that like people can reflect on text and decide like how it applies to their life in terms of how they want to take away the meaning from that. Firstly, we don't think they have the knowledge or capacity to do so. Note that people often read in order to become informed because they aren't to begin with. What this means is that even if they are informed to begin with, they might not have the same experience of the author and can't therefore draw meaning from like cultural narratives or narratives that don't necessarily apply to them exclusively. Like even if it is only a partial application, for example, you are a minority who's maybe experienced some discrimination but hasn't like been a victim of like extreme police brutality, you don't have like a comprehension of that issue and therefore can't draw a conclusion from that. We think that secondly, people don't actually always want to interpret the meaning. Like it's in our nature to find ways to like throw away responsibility or just to like avoid the pain of guilt. Like if no one really likes feeling guilty, right? We think like we avoid conclusions that make us feel uncomfortable. What this does here is flips all of the material on like critiquing society, because the reality is that people either go, oh, that's probably just like the businessmen in the towers who are like making like this rat race and like society, but they don't actually reflect on like how that buys into their life. On our side, when we like get a narrative about like toxic culture in society, instead of like immediately saying, oh, it's probably applying to someone else, we realize that the author's purpose is for us to reflect on ourselves, not to like put the blame on others. We're more critical. Thirdly, we think that this lack of interpretation especially applies to kids. We heard a lot of impacting here about like people in primary school. We think that like kids need to gain knowledge first before they can like have the ability to interpret things. Because like kids' knowledge is limited, they can't just like suddenly draw personal conclusions. Like they're probably just more concerned with like building Lego. They need to be able to learn to take on literal meanings before they can like interpret them themselves. This is why like it's not until level 3 English where you start like analyzing texts.
On that.
Why is this important? Because what's the point of writing if you can't interpret meaning? We think like the whole debate falls here when like authors just stop producing writing, or they don't feel validated for like their artistic expression because people can't interpret the meanings that they're trying to perpetuate. So then onto like why our side is better. A couple of pushbacks here from side affirming. Firstly, that the author's lens is not always right. Look, we think here that even if it is wrong, it can still be critiqued. Like, for example, the example I gave you in my intro about like Mein Kampf, we easily understand what the author's purpose is, right? But we can also easily dismiss that purpose or like apply that lens to like what not to do. We think that this can like, in the same way that you can see an example of what's good, we can see an example of what's bad. But secondly, we think there's a rational application to your life. You're not just going to suddenly like go around killing someone. If someone in a book, like if an author in a book expresses a purpose to like explain like homicidal tendencies or something, there's a rational in readers. Then on this push about like people feeling alienated from books they can't understand, there was like the example of the Pakistani refugee. Look, firstly, this is probably a good thing to the point like where like the point is here to not relate, right? You're trying to learn something new. You're trying to experience something different. The author's probably trying to explain an underrepresented issue. Like I don't hear about Pakistani refugees that much. I probably should hear more because that's probably like a severe issue. You take away the deep sentiment of that story and the issue that is going on. Secondly, people are interested in issues and concepts far away from them. This is just like why fundamentally people travel around the world, because they want to experience new things that are out of their reach. They want to experience things. This is like why like slum tourism exists, for example, because people also want to experience hardships, right? We think that they buy in to the opportunity to learn. When this doesn't happen on AF, the author loses this validation of expressing issues that are important to them, or the ability to like express issues that are like underrepresented. I think that's a really important impact. We need a lot of like, we need more texts that represent minority groups or like things that aren't talked about a lot. I think that even if a few people do feel alienated, the impact of like having more people buying into this and actually like taking away meaning is far more important in this debate. Yeah, I'll take a picture.
You said people feel guilty when they're confronted, and they don't. But why are they necessarily going to listen to the author when they tell them that they're guilty?
Well, you're like getting a direct meaning. Like what we're saying here is that there's an objective truth to like what the author's saying. You don't have to necessarily agree with that truth, but on like even if you believe that like people are less likely to apply, like think they're guilty on our even if you believe that like some people are less likely to want to receive that objective truth on their side, when you're left to like everything is subjective, we tell you there is no chance that they take away any like a chance of feeling guilty. But I think that like it is kind of true that people will take away guilt when the author when you buy into the author's direct intention. For example, in Lord of the Flies, when you like take in the intention of like fighting with each other and not wanting civilization, you take a look around at like how you act in the classroom. Are you like trying to be too much of a leader? Are you like silencing other people? I think people when you are given like a direct instruction of like how to behave, they do it pretty well. So then why don't readers just like get surface level on our side? Note this is my substantive contribution. So note that the author's intention is to create a deep meaning. They have incentives of like the juicy literature getting sales, and they like want to share meaningful content. That this is maybe out of like passion or experiences and perspectives. They want the validation of sharing those things. This means that author's intention is like a deep form of meaning. So why do readers get like this deep analysis when they consume this content? Firstly, they want to engage in foreign thought processes and experiences. They want to immerse themselves in something new. Secondly, they gain a more informed understanding. When they engage with the author's purpose and they sympathize with the experiences and perspectives that they've presented, they get like a comprehensive understanding of what is going on. This means like the quality of that engagement is really high as well. Thirdly, at least we think we get more like above surface level engagement on our side, because on AF we tell you that they are very prone to like bias of reading, and that's really harmful. So why is this important? We think that the whole purpose of text is to get a wider engagement and to get a higher quality engagement. When we get both of these things on side negating, I think it's a pretty like clear victory.
Speaker for was a fine speech. I would now invite the third speaker from the affirmative bench to come up and continue their team's case.
Can I like minimize the screen?
Oh yes, you can. I can also minimize it to desktop if you prefer not.
No, there we go.
Yeah, sorry guys. I think did I leave the laggy version up?
Yeah.
All the time. My apologies. Yes, no, it lags 30 seconds on YouTube. Yes.
So we can kill the live stream or something.
Yes, that is why.
Firstly, the affirmative team is debated with like quite a lack of like examples that have like anchored their case, which means it's really hard to follow a lot of the logic they supplied. But the second speaker came out and told us like we should support like Mein Kampf in schools. If you're taking it in actually what the motion like things, you should take like the literal meaning of like authoritarian fascist regime that committed a genocide on like 6 million Jews. Now, to clear up a few things in this debate. Firstly, it's really unclear, like a lot of their like characterization of people taking the author's purpose is like really unrealistic. Firstly, the lens they take it from is like that we're gonna know exactly what the author wanted from us in the book, and we're gonna like know exactly what they like aim to discuss in this book. It's not really clear how like the average reader is gonna be able to understand this. We think like the average reader just like goes in and reads, and they'll try and like take it from the author's lens, but in doing this, they won't understand exactly what the author meant from this book. So they'll just try and like read the book at face value without like taking out like different like views from it, which means we think this like it like knocks out like it's like an underlying thing in a lot of their material that's been like really ungenerous. We think like most people aren't gonna go read like an hour-long video about like what the author aimed to achieve in this book. We think most people aren't going to understand it. We think the lens they're going to read it from is like just take exactly what the author said at face value, like and not
not take the nuance views. We think the case in Mein Kampf is we don't take it exactly what the author means. We think we look at different parts of it, dissect it and interpret it in a different way.
What information?
Also, I just want to make it clear that all readers aren't homogenous. A lot of readers read in a lot of different ways. So we think a large portion of readers read for enjoyment, not to read for information learning. And I'm going to get to that and why we can win the debate on enjoyment alone. Now, who enjoys the book more? Firstly, they told us, people read to have something different, read pink because they don't want to go back to grey in their life. We think people don't want to read if they're being told exactly what to do, exactly how they should, learn the book. They want to be able to read and, take different things. They want to be able to read and be transformed into their, own, different world where they, can, imagine lots of different things, take it. They don't want to read feeling oh, no, I shouldn't, take how the reader's thing and take what the reader's meaning and take it in a different way. I need to try and stick to this. I need to focus in and make sure I stick to this. Most readers just want to drift away from what they really are living in their life, really read to enjoy and get out of their own head. We think this is so important. We think this also interacts a lot with Mason's split because people don't want to be alienated from the books they read. If they're oh, I can't understand what the author's meaning in this book, I don't want to read it anymore. And they we think they really enjoy being creative with their own understanding and be able to really debate and engage with what the book really means. We think this is so important because we think the reason most people read is they read to enjoy and they read to drift away. We think this is the largest stakeholder in today's debate. I think the whole debate has occurred a lot about people who try and take views and intellectual value out of the debate, but we think actually a large portion of people is who enjoy and they take little snippets from the books. They read something in Shakespeare and take a little theme and think how it implements their own life. They don't do a whole 2,500 word English essay on dissecting exactly what the author's intention was and what his purpose was here and how I can apply that to my own life. They just want to take the little thing and they don't spend the time looking through what the author says. Now, also on this, they mentioned a little bit of something about fire in the book and it should be how the author sees fire. But we think this is actually not a good thing. We think people should be able to see fire how they like to see it and if they enjoy the book more, which we think is the most important thing in this debate. Now, engaging in the other material, who's going to take more from the book? Now, you told us that people aren't going to be people are just going to shy away from really dangerous really important themes like colonialism, and they're just going to shy away from it. They're not going to try and engage in it, and they're going to take what they own. Firstly, we think on your side, people are just going to shy away from those books anyway. If you don't want to if you don't want to embrace those really serious themes, you're not going to go and you're going to feel guilty about it. You're not going to go and read a book like Baby No Eyes that discusses really detrimental and really deep and confronting themes. You're not going to go and read a book like that, so we're probably going to shy away from it. We think if you can read that book and just take little snippets on it, it's going to be less scary. It's going to be much less confronting, which you're going to be much more likely to take away from it. You're much more likely to read it. And even if you do read it, even if you're not going to take everything away from it, at least you're going to be able to take some things away from it when you're reading the book. Secondly, and this is again kind of assuming that they're going to be able to take it away. You said, oh, we need to look at it from a colonialism. You need to get in their shoes. We just don't think it's possible that a reader from a Western culture who has grown up never with much hardship, of just living a pretty atomic life growing up, they're never going to be able to look at a Pakistani's refugees experience and actually be able to understand what he's saying. The intersectionality experience they've had in their lives, they're never going to be able to understand at all what the author is saying, which means we think all the material that they have on how the author is they're gonna be able to understand the author. That just is really going into you're just never gonna really be able to understand the author's intentions, which means you're just gonna take the book at face value, which means you're not gonna take any nuanced meaning. We think some nuanced meaning can be taken and some more understanding, but we think that's so important. Finally, they told us that like it takes away a lot of like the sentiment and like why like authors like write books and like create the books that they Right, we think like they'd rather have people like take on a different meaning and like discuss their book in a different way and like take more understanding. We think they're gonna enjoy like their their artistic like talents being like discussed and like debated on a stage. We think that's gonna like they're gonna think that's gonna further enrich their book, and they're gonna really enjoy seeing like the different meanings come out and like so much different engagement with their book. Now what's happening at the end of this point? Well, we think we can take a lot more meaning out, because we think we're not going to like alienate a large amount. Like maybe there's going to be that like top 1 or 2% of readers who like study the author's purpose, like know exactly what it is, like take exactly what it is from it, and they're really gonna get so much out of it. But we just think the majority of readers, like who either read for enjoyment or like maybe sort of know what the author's getting at but don't really, are going to be able to take like little snippets of like values from like across time and cultures and really implement them into their lives in like little ways. Like you're not going to be able to understand the exact theme, but you're going to be able to take part of it out because that is applicable and like reaches out to you, reaches out to your own life, is going to apply it to your own life. So important, so proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for what was a fine speech. I will now invite the third speaker from the negating bench to come up and continue their King's case today.
The affirming side prefers a world where people are unable to analyse literature beyond their own bias and views on the world, as opposed to our side, where we believe that by just simply the process of trying to understand the author's intent inherently gives the reader a deeper understanding of the text and ways to apply that to their own life. I'm going to go through 2 points of clash: interpretation and then relatability for the reader, and then in turn with that, like, enjoyment of the book. They talked about how people can interpret themselves and they don't need the author to be like telling them what to interpret. I think the author doesn't have to write a statement of intent at the start of the book. Part of the process, as I just mentioned, is trying to decipher what the author's intent is. Think of the Hunger Games example that they use. Her like intent was to sort of characterize the sort of dystopian society we are like more turning into. She didn't need to write that at the start of the book. People were able to be like, why did the author characterize these people to act this way? She did it to like try and characterize like upper class and how people are like always prone to blame like upper class and how people like get enjoyment from people in lower class suffering, etc., things like that. People can interpret the author's intent through that. They don't need to find some personal meaning. They can, by just simply going through why did the author write this book, why did she characterize this as she did, they're getting that deeper level of understanding that they then can apply to their own life. If you look at it, if people are gonna By doing this process of trying to understand other people's intent when it comes to storytelling, they're becoming more accepting to new ideas, whether they agree with that or not. Think of a man reading a book about feminism. The author's intent could be just to educate and show where there are areas that still need improvement. But instead, this male reader reads the book and takes it as like an attack against men, which was not the author's intent at all. And in their world, where that man just then takes that as his own personal interpretation and doesn't try and understand the deeper meanings, he's not actually fully getting like the purpose of the book. If instead that man read the book and was like, why did she write this? Why did she like say these things she did? And then understand that just to, like that her like intention was to educate, he is then gonna be more educated and understand that in these debates it isn't just a point of like pointing blame towards other people. It's just understanding where things have gone wrong in the past. Even if they don't fully understand, the time they spent thinking about what the author's intent is inherently like contributing towards giving them at least just a deeper understanding of like where people are coming from genuinely outside of the context of their book. I'll take your POI.
If readers are smart enough to decode the meaning of the Hunger Games, why do they need to know the author's intention in the first place?
Well, I think throughout the entire debate with the affirming side has failed to see is that interpretation that people are getting, like the obvious ones, as I said, that was the author's intent. If they're getting that from the book, they are getting the author's intent with the book. They're not coming up with something completely different, like that's just from their own mind. They're getting the author's intent, but like they don't need proof. They don't need it written down somewhere that was the author's intent. They can read the Hunger Games and be like, her intent was to show what our society is going towards in a different way. They don't need that written down somewhere. So onto the whole kind of odd point about Mein Kampf and how there's I don't really, this kind of got a bit confusing here, but I think what personal interpretation can you get from this book? Does this, just because you can't exactly get, I feel like it's pretty commonly accepted that the values of Mein Kampf are not ones that should be applied to everyone's everyday life. Like you don't want high schoolers reading the book being like, how can I apply Hitler's knowledge to my own life? I feel like that's pretty commonly accepted. So why even bother reading it? People read it because they can read it and be like, why did Hitler write these things? What was his intention with these things? And you can better understand the way people write things in order to convince people of something. And there's just so many other areas you can apply it to other than the actual values of the author in the book. Just because you're trying to understand the author's intention doesn't mean you're going to automatically apply everything they say to your life. It's just giving you a different perspective and people a deeper understanding of things. On to relatability. They said that people would have to, if you're reading a book about a different, culture or something, you need to be able to interpret that yourself to relate it to your own life, because maybe you're not a part of that culture. I feel like they characterize this taking the base idea of a culture, the base idea of that culture's practices, empathy or something. Well, that then, in turn, is the author's intent with their book. So yes, they're not part of that culture, but by taking the idea of empathy, they're taking the author's intent to spread that message of empathy through their culture's practices, which in turn is our side of the moot, which they're taking that author's intent. And once again, purpose and intent of a book can be bigger than just applying it to your own life. It can be understanding experiences of other people. Think about a book on police brutality. A white person with no experience with racism or an attempt to understand the author's purpose in the book most likely won't take the message of a racist police force, but instead might take the message of perseverance of the black man that's constantly being unfairly accused of things by the police. But at the end of the day, if the author's intent was instead to educate then create more movement towards creating a fair police force, I feel like if instead that man was what is the root of the problem in this book, and therefore more people are educated on the issues and create more movement towards change, that's a much larger benefit than some marginal more self-encouragement in a couple of individuals. And then they talked about how people are never going to understand author intent if they can't relate to it. I think that's really unrealistic to say that someone won't read a book on immigration, they won't understand it at all because they're not an immigrant. Because I feel like the majority of people have basic human empathy where they can interpret author's ideas without having direct experience with it themselves. It's likely that they can understand these ideas, and just because they can't, they won't be able to relate at all if they are looking for this personal meaning. How can I apply this completely different world to my own life? They're not going to be able to relate at all. Yeah, right, they're not going to want to read that book about things they don't understand. But if instead they're looking at it from the point of the view of why did the author write this? Why did they do this? They are going to be able to take so much more meaning to from the book. To when we don't need to prove that the reader perfectly understands the author's intent and perfectly understands all of these things. We are just trying to encourage readers to have a deeper understanding of the book and then take away those messages that at the end of the day is so much more important than any sort of marginal benefits they try to claim are unique on their side. When at the end of the day we get those benefits too. The man reading the book about police brutality, just because he understands that the root of the problem in that book was racism, doesn't mean you can't take away the message of perseverance as well. We can claim most of those benefits of just these small effects even when they don't relate, because once again that is also part of the author's intent. The author's intent isn't just one thing. They can have multiple purposes with a book. I'll take a POI if you have one.
Yeah, wouldn't it be better for people to arrive at their own conclusions to make it more consistent?
I think that's exactly part of my point. It's better for people to arrive at their own conclusions of the author's intent, because then they're getting a better understanding of empathy and of how other people's minds work instead of always staying within your own personal biases. If you're always reading a book that you're interpreting yourself and you're not thinking, why did the author write this, you're only going to be able to think in the realm of your own experiences and biases. By wondering why that someone wrote that book in the first place, you are able to better expand your interpretation of that book and what it was intended for the reader to take away. Whether they applied that knowledge or not that they've gained from interpreting what the author wants, they still at least now have that deeper understanding of trying to put themselves in someone else's shoes and gaining more empathy.
I thank the speaker for what was a fine speech. Now we move to the leader's reply section of the debate. As is customary, we will cut the speech times in half to 4 minutes. We will reverse the speaking order, and all POIs will no longer continue for this piece of the debate. So I would now invite the negating speaker to come up and give him his reply. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm one speech ahead. Apologies. Oh, no, I'm good. Sorry. Sorry, I am a little jet lagged. My apologies. Continue onwards.
No, we can skip
Wow, I see how it is trying to silence me.
the
I'm gonna use my author's purpose to see that silencing is bad. Apply that to my life.
Somebody applied Mein Kampf a bit too literally.
Okay. Oh wait, I forgot mine. On-site negating, we refuse to accept a world where you close yourself off from differing opinions, where you refuse to participate in an opinion different from your own, and when you fail to diversify your perspective on the world around you. This is a world where society becomes unproductive because we just get stuck in our own cycles, and where we refuse to critically reflect on ourselves. I think there's two points of clash in this debate. Firstly, on quantity of meaning or engagement, and then secondly, on the quality of that meaning that you inherit, which I think is probably the most important tipping point here. So firstly, on quantity of meaning and engagement. Look, we heard a couple of pushes here from side affirming. Firstly, this point around alienation and how people are never going to understand another culture or perspective and therefore just won't participate in this. Look, I think firstly, this was quite a pessimistic characterization. I think it's highly important as a society to understand new perspectives, and I think it's a highly valued principle. I gave you the example of just people traveling the world. People do want to buy into different things, and even if it is a tough to look at issue, people are in reality going to buy into that. I think empathy is a really important principle of society and something that people try to inherit into that. But I also think that the value of those texts is held quite highly. People especially in a modern day and age, the value of minority represented texts is quite high, where people share different perspectives and nuanced perspectives and try to get an understanding of the struggles that other people experience. So then this other push about personal relatability, note here that firstly, this wasn't really exclusive. On our side, people can still read books that have similar experiences to themselves if they do want to have something that they relate to more personally. But secondly, again, we tell you that people do want foreign things, and that they can just relate to it by inheriting the lens and then applying it to the life around it. So overall, I think we do get more engagement insofar as that people who do read these books do want a source of escapism. They do want a source of walking in someone else's shoes. The grey pink thing that Jacob told you. I think that ultimately gets us more engagement. When we get that higher quantity of meaning, ultimately this is the purpose of the book, to books in general, to diversify people's opinions and how they view the world. When we get more critical lenses of how we look at life, even if they are lower quality, I think we can win off that. So then on quality of this meaning. Look, firstly, to break down the guilt or other bias, we heard that on our side, we're still going to feel this guilt. Firstly, I told you at second that they understand that the authors have an objective perspective and that it's not really a personal attack. Whereas on their side, they sort of analyze it and get defensive. But secondly, at worst, this would be symmetrical. I'll explain later why we don't need to prove this guilt to win. But also note on this point that like they just won't read books because with confronting issues because they don't want to feel that guilt or they don't want to confront those hardships. Note that the debate doesn't just take place in a world where like these are all harmful books. Like books can look like a celebration of culture, or like the romance books that Jacob characterized to you at first. This was largely like underdeveloped by side affirming. So even if we lose on these like hard books, we think that the depth of like positive benefits and positive meaning can still win us the debate. But even if not, like note that sympathy, like the sympathy to someone's perspective and experiences gains a higher quality of analysis and a higher quality of that meaning. So even if the guilt does prevent them from reflecting on themselves, they still gain a deeper meaning to apply to the world around them. So for example, even if a man doesn't engage with a feminism narrative personally, they still apply it by being more aware of sexism around them. I think that that's still a really important development and meaning, and an important like depth of meaning that is unique to side negating. But even if we are symmetrical on guilt or like quality of meaning, we told you that the fundamental bias still exists which prevents a baseline meaning. Jacob told you how like people misinterpret symbols and they can't actually just like get any meaning whatsoever because they don't understand the story. I think when we weigh this against like people getting offended or like appropriating other cultures, we get better quality of meaning and quantity of meaning. Very proud to be here.
I thank Speak for a fine speech, and then now invite the leader of Side Affirmative to come up and close today's debate.
A few things to go over in this reply. Firstly, on the idea of interpretation. Secondly, on cultural understanding, and then lastly, on the readers themselves and whether or not they're actually going to enjoy the books on which side of the house. So firstly then, on interpretation. What did they tell us here? They told us that people need the author's intention to understand the text fully. But then we heard down at third that they don't need the author's intention to fully understand because they can understand it themselves. That's kind of a contradiction there, but also, firstly, we also told you that you don't need to be guided by the author. People aren't stupid, and a homogeneous people aren't stupid. They can form conclusions themselves, like they nicely pointed out to us. Secondly, readers are not a homogeneous group that only think one thing and follow one opinion. You've got lots and lots of different views and different things. But also, thirdly, we think that people who just inherently disagree with the author's intention of why exactly they wrote that in the first place might just reject all the ideas of the novel in itself because of what the author wanted to represent. We think that that means all of the ideas are taken away by these people, and we think that's extremely harmful. Okay, but then I think what do we have to do at the end of this point? I think both sides have probably done a good job at telling us that we've gotten the author's intention, but what do we have that's different under our side that's really good? We have other interpretations that the author might have never have thought of themselves. These new interpretations are probably very beneficial because they can also help people understand the novel more. It makes the novel richer, and they take these in their daily lives. So then this moves me on into cultural understanding then. What did we tell you here? We told you that lots of foreign concepts may be written in literature, and this may be very difficult to access for someone living in America trying to read an African novel that was written in Kenya. We think that that means you can find when you interpret it yourself, you're not confined to the ideals of the author. What happens instead is you can probably make connections, similarities within your own culture to develop a better understanding of that culture. We think that is an extremely important example, right? But also note that Leo gave you the example of Baby No Eyes. That book is literally about systemic racism in New Zealand, right? That means when someone maybe reading it in Japan reads that novel, they get an understanding of probably things that happen across the world, something that's probably not because when I'm looking that book up, I literally see nothing about the author's intention, right? But I can understand through my own interpretations because author's intentions are just not always online for exactly why they wrote that novel. We think that that's also important. But then let's talk about finally readers themselves, and if you want to believe that both sides just get the same on those last 2 points, here's why we uniquely win and only get greater reader enjoyment under our side of the house. Note that this was my split material, right? And that when you're constantly feeling you have to analyze the novel and you have to feel you're matching the author's intention and you have to understand every single nuance of that book to why exactly they wrote it and why they wrote it that way and why you have to do that, it just makes the whole reading process extremely boring and also just unenjoyable. And also that And also just like when you don't understand the intention, or you just don't agree with the intention, you just don't feel connected with that novel, and you just don't think that you're thing. We think the idea of people like wanting to read, like they pointed out, is for enjoyment. We think you get enjoyment by reading and making your own interpretations. You probably aren't enjoying yourself when you're constantly studying up and trying to search up for the author's intention to understand why exactly you read that book. We think that that probably means that people stop reading halfway through because they're bored. But under our side of the house, because they can just like leave themselves to their own interpretation, that means they can continue reading, take what they want from that novel, enjoy themselves, which is really, really important, right? Because we just want people to keep reading, to take these messages. We would rather have people continue reading and taking some aspects of lots of different books rather than than people reading like a single book, spending so many hours trying to research and understand the like complicated nuances that only take those small ideas from that one book. We would rather have lots of people reading lots of books and taking lots of different ideas.
Thanks, Steve, for a fine speech. I think everyone thought it was an excellent debate. I'm just going to turn off the live stream. The speakers, if they could cross the floor, shake hands, and then if everyone could head outside so the judge can make their adjudication call. Congratulations, everyone. Really good debate.
I assume it's on.